I never imagined Christmas morning could smell like betrayal. That was the first thought that came to me as I stood in my own kitchen, the scent of cinnamon rolls in the oven, pine needles from the tree, and underneath it all, the quiet, bitter realization that something in my home had gone terribly wrong. But back then, I didn't know the truth. I only felt it like a faint tremor in the ground before an earthquake. See, last Christmas was supposed to be about family, togetherness, healing. My husband, David, had lost his mother earlier that year, and when his sister, Tanya, said she didn't want to spend the holidays alone, I didn't hesitate. "Of course she can stay with us," I told him, stirring sugar into the cider. "It'll be good for all of us." He smiled, then that soft, grateful smile I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. "You're a good woman, Marlene," he said. "Mama would have loved you for this." Back then, I believed him. I believed everything. Tanya arrived 2 weeks before Christmas with 2 suitcases, a box of mismatched ornaments, and a perfume that lingered in every hallway, something sweet but sharp, like she wanted to be noticed even in her absence. She was polite at first. Almost too polite. "Thank you so much for having me, Marlene," she'd said that first night, pulling me into a hug that felt rehearsed. "You have such a cozy home." I brushed it off. I'd never been good at reading between the lines. The house came alive that week. Christmas music playing in the mornings, lights twinkling on the porch, David humming while he wrapped gifts at the dining table. Tanya would sit beside him, sipping cocoa, teasing him like old times. It was the kind of scene you'd see on a greeting card. Except, I began to notice little things. When Tanya was around, David seemed lighter, too light. They shared jokes I didn't understand. They whispered sometimes, like siblings do, but their voices lowered when I entered the room. One night, I walked into the living room to find them looking at something on his phone. When they saw me, they both jumped a little. "Oh, hey, babe," David said quickly. "We were just checking some photos from when we were kids." I smiled and nodded, but my chest tightened. Because David wasn't the kind of man who jumped. Not over family photos. Still, I let it go. I wanted Christmas to be peaceful. On Christmas Eve, our house was full the laughter of nieces and nephews, the clinking of glasses, the warmth of roasted turkey filling every corner. Tanya looked radiant in her red sweater and gold hoops, fluttering around the kitchen like she owned it. Every so often, she'd lean against the counter, whisper something to David, and they'd laugh softly. I watched them from across the room, and for the first time, I felt like the guest. That night, after everyone left, I was washing dishes when Tanya came up behind me. "You really do everything, don't you?" she said lightly, picking up a towel. "You're kind of amazing." I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "It's just habit. My mother raised me that way." "Well," she said, glancing toward the living room where David was half asleep on the couch, "he's lucky to have you." There was something in her tone, admiration, maybe envy, I couldn't tell. But it stayed with me, like a splinter under the skin. Christmas morning came wrapped in gold light and soft carols. I woke early to make breakfast, humming as I cracked eggs into a bowl. David was still asleep. Tanya's door was closed. I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt, like a perfect ending to a long, hard year. Then the phone buzzed, a notification from our bank. "Withdrawal alert, $2,000 from joint account." My hand froze mid-stir. David hadn't mentioned anything about taking out money. We'd agreed to keep our savings untouched after all the holiday expenses. I told myself it was a glitch. I even laughed a little, but when I opened the app, I saw a pattern: small transactions throughout the week. Grocery stores, gas stations, and a few that made no sense. An online boutique, an electronics store, a luxury hair brand. My pulse quickened. I scrolled faster. The most recent one? Tanya's name on a delivery address. I stared at it until the screen blurred. Surely not. She wouldn't. Just then, Tanya's laughter floated from down the hall. Carefree, melodic, like nothing in the world could touch her. I stood there, phone trembling in my hand, heart pounding against my ribs. Something in me shifted. That evening, as we sat around the fire opening gifts, I watched her closely. She handed David a box inside, a sleek leather wallet. He smiled, saying, "You didn't have to, sis." "Oh, it's nothing," she said sweetly. "You've done enough for me already." That line, "you've done enough for me already," hit differently. And the way she looked at him, it wasn't gratitude, it was possession. I felt a chill run through me. I smiled for the sake of the photos, for the sake of peace, but inside, my heart was breaking. That night, long after the fire had died, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, scrolling through every transaction, each one another piece of trust stripped away. The next morning, I checked again. The account was nearly empty, and Tanya? Her room was spotless, her suitcase gone. On the counter, a sticky note, "Thank you for everything. I'll pay you back soon. T." David's bank card lay beside it, still warm from use. He came into the kitchen moments later, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, babe. What's wrong?" I turned to him slowly, holding the note. "She's gone," I said. "And so is our money." His face went pale but not surprised. That was the moment my world stopped.
For a long moment, David didn't speak. He just stared at the note in my hand, the morning light washing his face in a grayish hue. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, too calm. "She left?" I blinked at him. "You knew she was planning to leave?" He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes avoiding mine. "No. I mean, she mentioned she might visit a friend after Christmas. I didn't think she'd actually go. I studied him, every inch of him. The man I thought I knew so well, the one who could read my moods before I spoke, suddenly felt like a stranger." "She took our money, David," I said quietly. "Almost all of it." He frowned, still avoiding my gaze. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. You know Tanya, she's a bit careless sometimes. Maybe she—" "Careless?" I cut him off. "She didn't trip and fall into our bank account. These are intentional transactions. Online orders. Her name, her address." His lips parted, but no words came out. And then I saw it, that flicker in his eyes. Not confusion, not disbelief, guilt. I felt something cold and heavy settle in my stomach. "David," I said slowly, my voice trembling, "please tell me you didn't give her the card." Silence. The kitchen clock ticked each second, a hammer to my heart. "David!" He exhaled sharply, then finally met my eyes. "It was supposed to be temporary. She said she just needed help, Marlene. I told her I'd cover a few bills for her until she got back on her feet. I could barely breathe." "How much did you think a few bills would cost?" "Because she drained us, David. She took everything." He ran a hand over his face. "She promised to pay it back. I didn't want to worry you right before the holidays." I laughed, a bitter, broken sound that barely escaped my throat. "Didn't want to worry me? You let her use your card behind my back, and you call that protecting me?" He didn't answer. In that moment, the world I'd built, the marriage I'd believed was rooted in honesty, cracked wide open. I went into our bedroom, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the Christmas lights, blinking faintly through the window. Each tiny flicker felt like mockery. I thought about every time I'd welcomed Tanya in, every meal I'd cooked, every little kindness I'd offered, and how she'd smiled through all of it, knowing what she was doing, and worse, knowing her brother was letting her. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal. I needed to think, not scream, not break down, just think. David kept saying he'd sort it out. He'd call Tanya, send messages, leave voicemails that went unanswered. He'd sigh, shake his head, and tell me, "She's not like that, Marlene. You know, she's just impulsive." But I did know. I knew she was like that, and maybe she always had been. I started remembering things I'd brushed aside. The time she borrowed my gold bracelet for a weekend and never returned it. The way she'd once said, You've got such a good setup here, savings, a nice house. You don't know how lucky you are. The way David had always softened around her, even when she was wrong. Family loyalty can blind you, and my husband was blind as a man could be. 3 days later, I decided I couldn't just wait for answers. I called the bank myself, explained the situation. They confirmed what I already knew. Tanya had been using David's card for weeks, maybe months. Small withdrawals at first, increasing each time. Then the woman on the phone said something that made my stomach drop. "Mrs. Collins," she said gently. "There were a few authorization texts sent to your husband's number for large transfers. One of them was approved." "Approved?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You mean he confirmed it?" "Yes, ma'am." The confirmation came from his registered phone. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence, the phone heavy in my palm. He knew, not just about the card, about the withdrawals, the amounts, the approvals. He hadn't been tricked. He'd allowed it. That night, I confronted him again. He was sitting in the living room scrolling through his phone, the Christmas tree still glowing softly behind him. "I called the bank," I said. He looked up. "Oh? They said you approved the transfers." He froze. The faint smile he'd been wearing slipped away. "David, why?" I asked, stepping closer. "Why would you do that?" His shoulders sagged. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said finally. "She said she just needed help paying rent, then her car broke down. Then she said she'd pay me back after Christmas. I kept meaning to tell you, but what?" I snapped. "You thought it was easier to lie to me?" He didn't look up. "I didn't want to disappoint you." That line hit me harder than I expected, because that's what betrayal feels like, not rage at first, but disappointment. Deep, aching, bone-level disappointment. "You already did," I whispered. We sat in silence, the sound of the fire crackling between us. Finally, I said, "Do you even realize what she's done to us? To me?" He looked up then, his eyes full of regret or maybe shame. "She's my sister, Marlene. I couldn't just leave her out there with nothing." I nodded slowly. "So instead, you left me with nothing." His jaw tightened. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. For the first time in 15 years, I saw the man I loved, not as my husband, but as someone who had chosen someone else's comfort over my trust. I stood, walked to the tree, and turned off the lights. The room fell dark. I didn't cry, not then, because sometimes tears feel too small for the size of the wound. The next morning, I packed a small bag, just enough for a few days. When David asked where I was going, I said simply, "Somewhere I can think." I drove to my sister Evelyn's house across town. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She just hugged me, tight and long, the way only sisters do. "Whatever it is," she murmured, "we'll figure it out." And for the first time since Christmas morning, I let myself cry. At Evelyn's house, I slept for nearly 12 hours straight. When I woke up, the air smelled like coffee and something warm blueberry muffins. Maybe, for a moment, I could almost pretend life was simple again. But then, I saw my phone on the nightstand, 3 missed calls from David, 2 unread messages. "Please come home. We can fix this." I didn't reply. Instead, I sat up, pulled my robe tighter, and whispered to myself, "No more fixing what someone keeps breaking." Evelyn poured me a cup of coffee and sat across from me at the kitchen table. She had that quiet kind of patience, the kind that waits for truth to find its own way out. When I finally told her everything, she didn't interrupt. She just listened, eyes narrowing in disbelief, then softening with sympathy. "So let me get this straight," she said after a while. "Your husband knew his sister was using his card, your joint account card, and didn't tell you?" "Yes." And now she's disappeared? Yes. She leaned back, exhaling sharply. Marlene, that's not a misunderstanding. That's betrayal. I nodded, staring down into my cup. The steam curled upward, thin and fragile. I don't even know where to start. Well, she said, you start by taking back your power. You've been the peacemaker for too long. Time to make some noise. Her words hit something in me that had been asleep for years. That afternoon, I called the bank again and filed a fraud report. I told them I wanted every transaction investigated and documented. Then I went through every email, every notification Tanya might have triggered, delivery confirmations, receipts, anything. I found an address, a small rental unit 2 hours away, under her name. I printed it out. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore, from clarity. David kept calling that night. I let him. Then finally, I picked up. Where are you? He asked softly, as if I were a fragile thing that might shatter if he spoke too loud. Somewhere safe, I said. Somewhere honest, he sighed. I'm sorry, Marlene. I messed up, but please don't do anything rash. I almost laughed. You mean like trust my instincts? Like confronting her. She'll just twist it. You know how she is. Oh, I know exactly how she is, I said. And for once, she's not the only one who's going to be heard. 2 days later, I drove out to that address. The neighborhood was quiet, tired-looking houses with peeling paint and porches sagging under the weight of old years. Tanya's car sat in the driveway, the same dented silver sedan she'd driven when she arrived at my house. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, staring at her front door. My heart was pounding, but my resolve was stronger. I knocked once. When she opened the door, her face froze mid-smile. Marlene? What are you doing here? Can I come in? I asked calmly. She hesitated, then stepped aside. The air inside smelled like stale perfume and something fried. Piles of shopping bags littered the floor, new clothes, electronics, luxury items. Nice place, I said, glancing around. Looks expensive. She crossed her arms. If you came to scold me, don't bother. I was going to pay him back. I turned to her, steady but cold. You weren't just taking from him, Tanya. You were taking from us, from me. Her eyes darted away. David said you'd understand. That stopped me. He said what? She shifted uncomfortably. He told me you're the forgiving type. That you'd be mad at first, but then you'd let it go. That's what you do. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I wasn't angry. I was humiliated. Because that's exactly how they saw me, as someone too kind to fight back. I walked toward her, my voice low. You used my home, my food, my trust. You laughed with me while you emptied our account. You looked me in the eye and called me family. She swallowed. I didn't mean for it to go that far. Then why didn't you stop? Silence. I took a deep breath and pulled out a folder, the bank statements, the receipts, everything. This is what you took. I've already filed a report. You can either pay it back voluntarily or face a case. It's your choice. Her face drained of color. You wouldn't do that, David. David doesn't speak for me anymore. The words surprised even me, but they felt good, solid, true. She looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she just sat down on the couch and buried her face in her hands. I messed up, she whispered. Yes, I said. You did. But that doesn't mean I have to carry it. I turned and walked out, my hands trembling, my heart pounding, not from anger but from release. When I got back to Evelyn's, I told her everything. She didn't cheer or gloat. She just said, about time you stopped protecting people who hurt you. That night, I sat by the window, the city lights flickering like distant candles. My phone buzzed again, a message from David. Tanya called. She said you threatened to report her. Why are you doing this? I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. Because it's the only way I'll ever heal. He didn't respond. And for the first time in weeks, I felt peace, quiet, fragile, but real. The next day, I met with a financial advisor. I opened a new account, in my name only. I started setting boundaries, not the kind that shut people out, but the kind that kept me safe. David texted again later that week, asking if we could talk in person. I agreed, but on my terms in public. We met at a small cafe near the waterfront. He looked tired, older somehow. I don't even know where to start, he said, staring into his coffee. Start with the truth, I said. He nodded slowly. You're right. I should have told you. I didn't want to be the bad guy between you and Tanya. You became one anyway, I said softly. The difference is, now I see it. He winced, but didn't argue. I'll make this right, I promise. I looked at him, and for the first time, I realized I didn't need that promise. I just needed to walk away with my dignity intact. You can start by letting me heal in peace, I said. He nodded, eyes glistening. And just like that, 15 years of love and loyalty felt like a faded photograph, still precious but no longer binding. That night, back at Evelyn's, I stood on her porch watching the stars. The air was cool and still, and for once, I wasn't waiting for anyone's apology. I was done waiting. 2 weeks passed before I heard from Tanya again. The call came on a gray Wednesday afternoon while I was folding laundry at Evelyn's. My phone buzzed against the counter, her name flashing across the screen like a bad memory trying to resurface. I almost didn't answer, but something in me, maybe closure, told me I needed to. Hello? Marlene. Her voice was small, fragile. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For a second, I said nothing, just listened to the silence between her words. It was the first time I'd ever heard guilt in her tone. I know I can't fix it, she continued. The bank called. They said you filed charges. I never thought you'd actually go through with it. I exhaled, slowly. Tanya, I didn't do this to punish you. I did it because actions have consequences. You stole from us, from me, and you expected me to smile through it. She sniffed. I wasn't thinking straight. Everything was falling apart, and I thought David would help me like he always has. I didn't think Would what? I asked gently. Finally, stop letting people walk over me. There was a long pause. Then she whispered, You sound different. I am. And for the first time, I meant it. By the end of that week, the story had reached the rest of the family. David's cousins called him. His aunt messaged me privately. I can't believe Tanya did that to you. We always knew she was a bit reckless, but not like this. Reckless. It was funny how people used that word to soften what really meant selfish. David came by once, unannounced. Evelyn was in the garden, and when she saw him pull up, she shot me a look, a silent, you sure about this kind of look. I nodded. He stood on the porch, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes tired. I wanted to tell you Tanya's moving out of state, he said. She's staying with a friend until things calm down. Running away, I said softly. He shrugged. She says she'll pay everything back, eventually. I smiled, a thin, tired smile. Tell her, I don't need the money. I just needed her to understand what she took wasn't cash. It was trust. David looked down. You really mean to let her face those charges? I do, I said. Because if I keep cleaning up her messes or yours, none of us will ever grow up. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he said, You've changed, Marlene. I've remembered who I am, I said. A week later, the family gathered for a post-holiday dinner at his aunt's house, something they'd planned months before the chaos. Evelyn came with me, insisting, If you're going to walk into that storm, you won't do it alone. When we arrived, I could feel the tension in the air before I even crossed the threshold. David was there, standing near the kitchen, talking to his uncle. His eyes met mine briefly soft, searching, but I didn't look away this time. His aunt, Denise, hugged me tightly when I walked in. "You didn't deserve any of that," she whispered. "We're all embarrassed by what Tanya did." "I'm not looking for apologies," I said gently. "Just accountability." She nodded, eyes glistening. Dinner was quiet at first, everyone tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. Then Denise finally said what no one else dared to. "Tanya made her choices," she said firmly, looking at David. "And so did you, nephew. Covering for her didn't help either of you." He sighed. "I know. I just didn't want to see her struggle." I looked at him then, not with anger, but with something softer. Sometimes loving someone means letting them face what they've done. You can't rescue a person who keeps setting fire to their own life. His uncle nodded. "She'll learn, or she won't. But either way, Marlene, you did right by standing up for yourself." Their words felt like a balm I didn't know I needed. Not validation, but acknowledgement. Later that night, as I was leaving, David followed me to the driveway. The air was cold, and our breath fogged in the dark. "I miss you," he said quietly. "The house feels empty without you." I turned to him. "It felt empty when I was there too, David. You just didn't notice." He looked down at his shoes, then back up at me. "Do you think we can ever fix this?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Trust isn't something you glue back together overnight. It's something you rebuild, piece by piece, if both people are willing." He nodded slowly. "I want to be." "Then start by being honest," I said. "With me, with yourself, with everyone. No more secrets for the sake of peace. Peace built on lies isn't peace, it's silence." He blinked, as if realizing that truth for the first time. We stood there for a moment, two people who once shared everything, now separated by choices they both made. Then I got in my car, turned the key, and drove away. That night, back at Evelyn's, she handed me a cup of tea and said, "How'd it go?" "Peaceful," I said with a faint smile. "In its own complicated way." She grinned. "That's growth talking." Maybe it was. Because somewhere between the betrayal and the heartbreak, I'd found something I hadn't expected. Clarity. I wasn't the same woman who'd smiled through secrets, who'd put everyone else's comfort above her own. That woman had finally stood up, not to destroy, but to reclaim. And that felt like freedom. By spring, the investigation wrapped up. Tanya agreed to repay part of what she took through a settlement. She sent a letter, handwritten, full of apologies and half-explanations. I read it once, then folded it carefully and put it away. Not out of bitterness, but because I didn't need it to heal. Forgiveness, I'd learned, isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about releasing yourself from the weight they left behind. That Easter, I went back to my own home, alone this time. The house was quiet, still carrying the faint scent of pine and cinnamon from months before. I lit a candle, sat by the window, and whispered a small prayer of gratitude for pain that taught me strength, for endings that made room for new beginnings. The same house that once echoed with deceit now held only the sound of my own steady breathing. And that, for the first time in a long time, was enough. Spring turned into summer before I even realized it. Days felt lighter, not because life had become easier, but because I had, too. I was no longer measuring my worth by who stayed beside me, or by how much I could hold together for everyone else. I had learned to let go, and in that letting go, I'd found something I'd never truly known before: peace. One morning, while watering the small garden behind Evelyn's house, she came out with her coffee mug and that knowing smile of hers. "You ever thought about what's next?" she asked. I looked up from the flowers. "What do you mean?" She leaned against the railing. You've been living here for months. And don't get me wrong, I love having you. But I can tell your spirit's restless. You're ready for something new. I smiled faintly. Maybe. But what does new even look like anymore? She sipped her coffee. Whatever it needs to. The question isn't what's next, it's who's next. The woman you're becoming. Her words stayed with me all day. That evening, I sat by the window with my journal. For the first time in years, the words came easily. Not about pain or loss, but about rebuilding. I wrote about the house I wanted to buy, small but cozy. About the counseling sessions I'd started attending every Thursday, learning how to love myself without guilt. I wrote about the bakery down the street where I'd started volunteering on weekends, helping with the morning rush. The owner, Mrs. Patel, said I had a calming presence that made customers feel at home. I hadn't realized how much I missed being useful, not for someone else's comfort, but for my own fulfillment. A few weeks later, Evelyn came home waving a flyer. They're opening applications at the community center. They need a coordinator for their mentorship program, someone patient, good with people, and organized. Sound like anyone you know? I laughed. You're not subtle, you know that? She grinned. I'm not supposed to be. You've been hiding and healing long enough. Time to live again. And so I applied. 3 interviews later, I got the job. The first day I stepped into that community center, I felt nervous but also alive. The sound of children laughing in the halls, the smell of crayons and floor wax, the buzz of purpose in the air, it reminded me of who I'd been before my life became a web of secrets and sacrifices. I started mentoring a young woman named Keisha, 19, full of potential but paralyzed by fear of failure. One day, she asked me, Miss Marlene, how do you keep going when people let you down? I smiled softly. You stop waiting for people to lift you up. You learn to do it yourself. And when you can, you lift others too. She nodded slowly, letting it sink in. I realized in that moment I wasn't just helping her, I was helping a younger version of myself. By midsummer, the world around me bloomed again. Evelyn's backyard turned into a small sanctuary, fireflies at dusk, lavender in the fire. Air, soft music from her old radio. Sometimes David called, not to fix things, but to check in. His voice was steadier now, humbler. He'd started therapy too. He said Tanya was living quietly up north, trying to rebuild her life. I didn't ask for details. Healing wasn't about revisiting the past anymore, it was about moving forward without dragging it behind me. He once asked if I'd ever consider coming home. I told him, I already am home. Wherever I stand in peace, that's home. He didn't argue. He just said, I understand. And for the first time, I believed he did. One Sunday morning, I went back to church for the first time in months. I sat in the back pew, unnoticed. The choir's voices rising like sunlight through stained glass. When the pastor spoke about forgiveness, he said, forgiveness is not pretending it didn't happen. It's choosing not to let what happened own you. And I felt tears sting my eyes, not of sadness, but release. I whispered a quiet thank you, not to him, but to God, to myself, to the universe for carrying me through the storm. Autumn came again 1 year since that first night of confrontation. I found myself standing in front of my old house, keys in my hand. The for sale sign had been taken down weeks ago. The paint had faded a little, but the bones were still strong, just like me. I walked inside. The air smelled of emptiness and echoes. I traced my hand along the kitchen counter, remembering laughter, arguments, late-night confessions. I didn't feel bitterness anymore, only gratitude for what it taught me. This time, I wasn't moving back to live in old memories. I was turning the page, fully. I listed it for rent to a young family, newlyweds with a toddler, full of hope. When I handed them the keys, the wife said, "It feels like this house has a warm soul." I smiled. "Take good care of her. She's seen a lot of love and a lot of lessons." That evening, I drove to the lake just outside town. The sky was painted with streaks of gold and lavender, the kind of beauty that humbles you. I stood at the edge of the water, the wind brushing my face, and thought about everything I'd survived. Betrayal had broken something in me, but it had also built something stronger. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not erasing the pain, but learning to live softer in a world that once made you hard. I took a deep breath and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for endings that became beginnings." A few weeks later, Evelyn hosted a dinner, just close friends and neighbors. As we ate, laughed, and passed plates around, I realized how full my life had become again. Not with perfection, but with peace. And when someone asked if I'd ever get back together with David, I smiled and said, "We're both writing new chapters." Sometimes love doesn't mean reunion, it means release. The table went quiet for a moment. Then Evelyn raised her glass. "To Marlene," she said. "To new chapters," everyone echoed. "To new chapters." And for the first time, I didn't flinch at the sound of my own name. That night, before bed, I looked in the mirror. Really looked. No sadness, no resentment. Just a woman who had walked through fire and came out glowing instead of burned. I whispered softly to my reflection, "You made it." And I smiled, not for the world, not for anyone's approval, but for me. Because healing, I realized, isn't a moment. It's a journey. And mine had just begun. Sometimes, when I sit quietly at night, I can still hear that December wind, the one that blew through my home the day my life cracked open. It's funny how the things that once shattered you can later sound like music once you've healed enough to listen differently. I used to think betrayal was the worst thing that could happen to a person. Now, I see it for what it really is, an unveiling. It doesn't just expose the people who hurt you. It reveals the strength you never knew you had. My sister-in-law took something from us. Yes, money, trust, peace. But the truth is, she also gave me something back. Clarity. She showed me what blind loyalty can cost, and what self-respect can save. I don't hate her. I don't even hate him. Hate keeps you bound to the very pain you're trying to escape. I just wish them both the kind of healing that no apology could ever give. Because at the end of it all, I learned that forgiveness isn't a gift you give to others. It's the key you hand yourself so you can finally walk out of the prison they built for you. Now, when I wake up each morning, I thank God not for what I lost, but for what I found inside myself once it was gone. Strength, peace, and a quiet kind of joy that no one can steal. So if you're listening to this, and you've ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most, please remember, you are not broken. You are being rebuilt. And maybe, just maybe, this pain isn't the ending of your story. Maybe it's the chapter where you finally learn to live for you. Would you have done what I did? Would you have walked away or tried to stay and fix it? Tell me in the comments, my friend. And if my story touched your heart tonight, don't forget to subscribe, because here, every story reminds us, even when the storm takes everything, grace can still rebuild what's left. End of full cinematic story. My sister-in-law joined us for Christmas, then vanished with my husband's bank card. Would you like me to format this entire 6-part script into a YouTube narration version with pacing marks, emotion cues, and natural voice pauses, exactly how Voices of Auntie May reads aloud?